Hello to y'all who have just joined. Thank you again for joining us today. Just a few housekeeping things again. Please stay on mute during the duration of the call so as not to interrupt our speakers. And then please keep your camera off throughout the call as well so we can focus on our presentation. This call will be recorded and will be posted on our website and sent out to all of y'all after the call, probably later sometime today or tomorrow. And then please, throughout the call, interact in the chat. Let us know what you think. If you have any questions, please put them there. I'll be checking the chat throughout the call, and then we'll pose your questions to our speakers at the end of the presentation. So we'll go ahead and get started. I wanted to introduce our two speakers today. First, we have your St. John's Riverkeeper, Lisa Rinaman, and then our Ecological Science Director, Soraya Aidinejad. Thank y'all again so much for being here, and I'll go ahead and kick it over to Lisa to get us started.
Thank you, Dryden, and thank you, everyone. My name's Lisa Rinaman. I'm your St. John's Riverkeeper, and here to talk about one of my favorite subjects, of course, the St. John's River, but also our effort to save our river's grasses. We'll talk about why it's so important, what some of the challenges are, and most importantly, what we can do to save our river's grasses. So let's jump right in. First, just want to remind everyone of our mission. St. John's Riverkeeper has been around for 25 years, and we've been fighting for a mission to defend the St. John's River and advocate for its protection. We're also a member of Waterkeeper Alliance, which is an international movement made up of more than 300 waterkeepers around the world. There's more than 175 waterkeepers here in the United States. And we're also a proud member of Waterkeepers Florida. There's 15 waterkeepers in the state of Florida working together on state policy. So we're very fortunate to have so much support as well as so many advocates standing up to give our waterways a voice. Today's topic is looking at SAV. SAV is short for Submerged Aquatic Vegetation. And our river's SAV, or submerged grasses, are the foundation of our river's health. They are basically the kidneys of the river. So they provide important water quality filtration, fish habitat. They keep sedimentation out of our water. They put oxygen into the water column. So it's really important to river's health and important for us to do all we can to make sure our river's grasses are healthy. They're also the canary in the coal mine. If due to SAV, they're very sensitive to water quality challenges and changes. And so when we see a disappearance of our river's grasses or we're not seeing them thrive, then that is an indicator of river health. And so we're very concerned about the conditions of our submerged aquatic vegetation in the St. John's River today. That is why in 2023, we launched our Save Our Rivers Grasses expedition. In 2017, I know this chart is hard to see, but if you look at the third column there, in 2017, prior to Hurricane Irma, we saw some really healthy grasses in the lower St. John's. This is basically Lake George north to Jacksonville area. In 2015 and 16, you saw more green spots. So we started seeing a decline in our underwater grasses pre-2017. But after 2017, when Hurricane Irma hit, we saw basically a 90% plus loss of submerged aquatic vegetation in the St. John's River. This is not something new. This has happened with big hurricanes when you have lots of water flushing through the St. John's River watershed. We've seen loss of underwater grasses with other storms. But what's new this time is we didn't see the grasses bounce back. So you can see in the columns 2018, 19, 2020, and beyond, we're just not seeing that recovery of the grasses, which are indicated by those bright green dots. And so after years of waiting and anticipating a regrowth after Hurricane Irma, we realized we needed to do something more. The St. John's Water Management District provided this slide. They do collect data on SAV, but we felt like it was important to not only collect more data using their protocols, but also look at water quality, which we'll talk more about in a minute. Other stressors beyond climate events and storms like hurricanes that stress the growth of SAV or could kill SAV can be increased salinity. We're seeing less and less grass in the Duval County, Upper St. John's, Clay County areas due to increased saltwater intrusion. When SAV gets exposed to more salt, it needs more light. And so if you're getting less light, and that can be due to harmful algal blooms that block light out, it could be turbidity, or when there's sediment stirred up in the water column, or it could be higher, darker water like we saw that was prolonged after Hurricane Irma. And then what we're also seeing is grazing pressure, where we're finding grasses, but we're seeing that wildlife that needs our grasses to survive, they're actually chomping it down to the bit. And so our grasses aren't growing and thriving as they once should due to multiple stressors based on multiple studies that we've been looking at our literature review as part of our exercise. But without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Soraya to talk a little bit about our Save Our Rivers Grasses expedition, a little bit what we've heard and what we're going to be doing next. So, Soraya?
Thank you, Lisa. As Lisa mentioned, this is a 5-year effort, and this year marks year 4. I'm going to give a brief update on some results and findings as we go in year 4 of our 5-year initiative. The results shown in the following slides are compiled from our first 3 years of data. At each site, we survey canopy height and bed cover, and we also conduct water quality at each site. So here's a map of our sites, followed by some field pictures. We have 14 sites. Our first site is the most northern site. It's located in Doctors Lake and Clay County. And our most southern site, Site 14, is located in Georgetown and Putnam County on the northern portion of Lake George. Here's some field pictures as well. Each summer, we've been fortunate enough to have some great interns eager to jump right in, and we're even able to train them on site in the field. Next slide, please. So something new this year that we will focus on is the SAV Enclosure Initiative. This acts as an expansion of the SAV expedition. In the spring of last year, we installed 10 protective enclosures behind residential, privately owned properties to safeguard SAV from grazers until the plants can establish themselves fully. What we're finding is that due to multiple stressors, the grasses are not rebounding quickly enough, and they're succumbing to background grazing pressure. Once they grow just a little bit, they can find themselves being ripped up and munched on by grazers. And so per our permit, these enclosures will remain in place for 2 years. And we're keeping these structures strictly for data and research purposes. Next slide, please. So this is a quick little video that I wanted to show that shows the installation process. This is our Fruit Cove site, and it highlights all the hard work and dedication from our volunteers and homeowners that have made this effort possible. So one of the reasons we decided to apply for our own permit to install these enclosures was due to the recovery rate seen at the 3-acre enclosure at Dancy Point, located in East Palatka. The green areas that you see in the drone image is SAV actually topping the water, reaching historical lengths pre-Irma. Next slide, please. So this one was installed in February of 2023. Signs of recovery started to show soon after that. As seen by the May data of that year, while the canopy height was still stunted, percent cover was already showing improvement compared to the outside. Percent cover is just another word for basically bed density. August of 2023 showed slight improvement at about 6 centimeters, and percent cover showed stark improvement at 63%. By October of that same year, which was one growing season, canopy height reached an average of 46 centimeters, nearing historical lengths. 46 centimeters is about 1.5 feet. And so unfortunately, this enclosure was breached in September of 2024, leaving the grass again in a struggling state. Next slide, please. So this is our Fruit Cove enclosure. It was the one that was shown in the video previously. This one's about 8,700 square feet, or about 350 linear feet. It's one of our bigger enclosures in size, with the exception of our Georgetown sites. The picture in the top right showcases the growth inside versus the stunted grass outside. The bottom right picture shows the hand of one of our interns from last summer holding a blade of eelgrass from inside the enclosure. And I'm going to keep saying val and eelgrass together, but Vallisneria is eelgrass. I don't mean to confuse anybody. And so for this, so recovery at this site began in the same month of installation, but it was really shown by July. At the same time of the September survey, The average canopy height was higher than ever recorded at this site. It was averaging 15 centimeters per val. So that's close to 6 inches. There's also a greater species diversity at this site since the enclosure was installed to include Eleochris, Rupia, and Naha. Prior to the enclosure, the only species that was documented at this site was val. Next slide, please. So our Orangedale site, so just north of the Shands Bridge on the east side of the river, is also showing remarkable recovery inside the enclosure. Pictured on the left is the eelgrass from July inside versus outside the enclosure. And the picture on the right was taken from the homeowner's neighbor back in November. And as you can see, the grass is topping the water, so great recovery here. Next slide, please. So growth at this site also started in the July timeframe, similar to Fruit Cove. Also similar to Fruit Cove, this site exhibits species diversity, but we had seen several species in May of 2024 prior to the enclosure. Our September survey showed an average canopy height of 21 centimeters for val and a percent cover of 53%. Again, so 21 centimeters is about 9 inches. So our Cooley Cove site. The next site that I wanted to discuss is Cooley Cove, which has exhibited the highest canopy height that we have seen at any of the enclosures. There are some pictures featured, which, they show some amazing eelgrass from this site, and a field picture of us having some fun surveying in the pouring rain. So this enclosure was also installed in May, but due to algae, a survey could not be completed for that sampling event. July showed great recovery, but September showed immense recovery with an average canopy height of 67 centimeters, which is just over 2 feet long. And so at the time of the September survey, no val was found outside of the enclosure as it was present at the other sampling events, but only Cara was present outside. And so I'll talk a little bit about Cara. Cara is an SAV, but it's actually a type of macro algae. It's commonly referred to as muskgrass. It has a very unpleasant odor. And so we consider eelgrass the gold standard for SAV in the river. It is the preferred SAV species for species such as manatees. Cara has a low biomass, so it doesn't represent an ideal food source for grazers. However, there is evidence to suggest that Cara is an early colonizer that appears prior to other SAV species, which could be a positive indicator of more diverse and abundant SAV growth in the future. Next slide, please. So I did want to highlight a couple of sites that did not show the same results. The first is Jennerson Point, just south of Willaca. The picture on the left shows us installing the enclosure in April. And the picture in the middle is an example of what the substrate at this site looks like. In this stretch of the river, we're finding all of the river sediment looks like this in color and is tested positive for multiple types of toxic cyanobacteria. Next slide, please. This enclosure was installed in April. While val has been present in past sampling months, it had not been present at any of the 2025 surveys. Instead, all that we're finding is Cara. It does, however, appear that the Cara, with the help of the enclosure, is reaching higher canopy heights and greater percent cover. Next slide, please. So the final site that I will discuss is the Georgetown South site, our furthest site south, and this one possesses the second largest enclosure that we installed. The picture in the middle shows one of our team members grabbing an algae sample. This site was selected as a surveying location in 2024, and it has had persistent algal blooms most of the selected surveying dates. So as you can see, the only actual date that we could survey was in May. And of the 6 sampling events, 4 of which showed algae in the water column, the sampling date in May showed Rupia and Cara, but no val was present. And so with that, I'll turn it back to Lisa.
Thanks, Soraya. So what can we do? Obviously, we're seeing some interesting results. One thing I want to note is with our protective enclosures where we're keeping grazers out, that's not a solution. It's just a research technique. So it allows us to get more information about what's going on, if there's no grazing pressure as well as compared to outside. And as you saw with Soraya's notes, that we're seeing that the grass can grow. There's a viable native SAV seed bank. So we're seeing native grass seed banks that can grow. Unfortunately, it's not growing outside. One of the things too that's different with our work is that we're taking water quality data at each site to make sure we understand exactly what's going on at each site and we can compare that. And we're using the same protocols as the agency so we can share data with their data and historical data. And so, unfortunately, we've not found one thing that will offset the loss of submerged aquatic vegetation in the St. Johns River. But we do believe if we take a holistic watershed approach and focus on St. Johns River restoration, that we can do something working together to make sure we're bringing back our grasses. And just to point out here, the St. Johns River watershed is a huge watershed. This covers an 8,800 square mile area, which is 16% of the state of Florida. So everything that happens within this watershed impacts our downstream basins. The upper basin of the St. Johns River begins in Indian River County, Brevard County, and Osceola counties. And the St. Johns starts its 310-mile journey from Indian River County, just west of Vero Beach, all the way north until it meets the St. Johns River. The work that we're presenting today is an 80-mile stretch from Lake George to Doctors Lake. We selected that site because of what we were seeing as vulnerability to saltwater intrusion as well as persistent algal blooms. But since we've been doing this research for the last 3 years, we are getting phone calls from many of you out in the area in the middle basin as well as the upper basin that they're seeing similar SAV loss. And so this is not just a lower river issue. It's something we need to discuss throughout the St. Johns River. And we're working with different groups as well as individual fishermen and anglers out in these different areas. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of data. While there's been about 20 years worth of data collection in the lower St. Johns, there's very little submerged aquatic vegetation by the agencies in the middle and the upper. So we have more work to do in those areas. But it does take a holistic approach. One thing we need to continue to do is to reduce nutrient pollution in the St. Johns River. When you have excess nutrients, you get blue-green algal blooms like this one. And what we've seen them negatively impact the SAV in 3 different ways. One is when you have these mats of blue-green algae on the top of the water, it blocks really important light. And as we know, these can be really toxic to wildlife as well as humans. So it's bad for us, it's bad for fish, it's bad for our SAV. Another thing we're seeing is persistent blue-green algae throughout the water column, where we're not seeing the mats like this that we've historically been familiar with, but we're actually seeing where the entire water column looks more like pea green soup. And so it's blocking light, all the way down to the river bottom. And then the third thing we're seeing, is Soraya mentioned, is cyanobacteria actually in the sediments of the river. And that's something we're still doing more literature review and research to better understand what impact that has to the roots of SAV. We are seeing some sites where the SAV just lets go and it just floats away and the roots are not attached as they should. So there's something we know we need to do throughout the St. Johns is reduce excess nutrients in the St. Johns. One win I do want to highlight for this for the river is this past legislative session. There were 2 major pieces of legislation to offset or to correct our failed biosolids policy in the state of Florida. You may have heard us talk about how South Florida banned the land disposal of sewage sludge, also known as biosolids, which is really rich in nutrients, but also other contaminants. And when the South Florida banned this practice, they began sending their sewage sludge to the headwaters of the St. Johns, nearly 70,000 acres, 70,000 tons every year. Luckily, the legislature, if this moves through, banned that practice of this nasty stuff being disposed of on land by 2028. And then complementary legislation was passed to address regulatory needs of Class AA biosolids, which is a little bit cleaner than Class B, but it still has the nitrogen phosphorus problem. And so there'll be rulemaking that will be underway to set those regulations up. And our headwaters specialists, Niyata Shah and the headwaters, will be working with other individuals to provide oversight to this rulemaking. In addition to getting the biosolids sewage sludge policy right, we need to continue to reduce nutrient runoff of agricultural land. Agricultural land, we're very blessed to have a lot of ag land in the St. Johns River watershed. It obviously provides food for and jobs for our community, but we need to make sure that best management practices are truly protective of our waterways and that those are being complied with to reduce nutrient runoff of farmland. Continue to increase the nutrient reductions of our industries. There are total maximum daily loads and basin management action plans that require a reduction of nitrogen and phosphorus. We need to make sure that our facilities are in compliance, as well as those rules and regulations aren't weakened based on pressure from some of the industry. And then we can also do all of our own part on making sure we're using little to no fertilizers, using native plants, making sure only rain goes down the drain, but knowing that whenever we have rainfall, we'll see nutrients go into our waterways if we're not doing our part to reduce our nutrient footprint. And with 1,000 people a day moving into Florida, we need to see less this and actually have more resilient, less green grass in our St. Johns River and focus on more low impact development, more resilient development and smart growth. If we want to grow in the state of Florida, let's do it in a way that's not going to undermine the health of our waterways and then ultimately our submerged grasses. In addition, as we see construction going underway, making sure when wetlands are destroyed that the services are offset and there's not sedimentation running off into our waterways, increasing turbidity and reducing flooding. Because as we see more flooding in our waterways, you see more bad things go into the river, as well as obviously the impact to properties. So making sure that we're being more resilient, both in water quality and long-term growth for our community. Another thing we can do is focus on reuniting Silver Springs and the Ocklawaha rivers. By reuniting the natural connection of Silver Springs, the Ocklawaha, and the St. Johns River, it'll help offset the loss of SAV in several different ways. One, it increases natural free-flowing water into the St. Johns instead of keeping it behind the dam. The artificial Rodman Pool also converts inflowing nitrate into a form of less desirable ammonium nitrogen that actually can produce more toxic algal blooms. The dam also restricts the delivery of silica, which is an element critical to the natural beneficial algae in the St. Johns River. And by having the natural delivery of nitrate and silica in the lower St. Johns, it helps reduce harmful algal blooms that can be highly toxic and provides more of a food source for the food web that increases our fisheries. Not to mention the dam is actually blocking a native SAV seed source from upstream. It restores more than 15,000 acres of forested wetlands, which are the best biofilters a river can have, and it promotes a natural, healthy ecosystem downstream. So by reuniting this natural system, we'll see significant benefits, not only in the Silver Springs and the Ocklawaha itself, but also downstream in the lower St. Johns River. And an added benefit too, it opens up migratory fish patterns. So you get our native fish back into Silver Springs, as well as in the Ocklawaha and the St. Johns, and even helps the South Atlantic Bight. So really important to this, what should be a naturally connected ecosystem. With all that said, though, we also know we need more data. And so we'll be heading back out to the field next week for our first of our 2026 Save Our Rivers expedition. And I'll turn it back over to Soraya to talk about some of the new things we're adding this year. Soraya?
Can you change the slide? All right, thank you, Lisa. So some additions to the 2026 expedition. We plan on sediment sampling for total nitrogen and total phosphorus. As Lisa mentioned, we're seeing persistent algal blooms and algae in the water column, as well as the bright green sediments that we're seeing at our sites. And so we want to understand the role of nutrients in the actual substrate to the growth of SAV. We also really want to test for the sulfide sampling in the sediment pore water. Sulfide toxicity can severely inhibit the growth of SAV by poisoning the root tissues and interrupting respiration. And we will release a 2026 report that will compile 4 years of data, and we will have a series of roundtables following our expedition. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our watch tool. It's a new reporting system. It's a very quick survey to help report issues and observations to us so that we can respond as quickly as possible. All you have to do is scan the QR code on your phone, and it should take less than 5 minutes to complete. Also, if you have SAV or have had SAV and want us to come take a look at your area, you can use this tool to connect with us as well. And so with that, we are ramping up to get in the field next week, as Lisa mentioned, and start our 4th year of monitoring and surveying, and we're looking forward to publishing our findings shortly after that. If you scan the QR code on the left, that will take you to our story map for our 2025 expedition, which compiles our report in an easy to follow format. Our 2025 report is also on the website, so if you want to take a look at that, it is available and published. I think you're muted, Lisa. Oh, there you go.
With that, we're going to turn it over to Dryden. If you have any questions in the chat, she'll facilitate the Q&A. Dryden?
Yeah, thank you so much, Lisa and Soraya, for an informative presentation. I've got a few questions for you from the chat, but to those in the audience, if you have more questions, continue putting them in the chat and we'll get to them. The first one was just, Soraya, as a reminder, which was the species you were talking about that has less biomass, but is sort of a pioneer species that may predict growth of other species?
Yeah, so that is called Chara, Chara.
Very cool.
And we don't see it as much from our observations in Duval County as much as we do in the Putnam County area.
And one thing I would just add, we're seeing it most of it in the southern part of our area, like Willatka, upstream to Lake George.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Another question is, did you guys install enclosures at all 14 sites that you discussed? And then what process did you use to determine those 14 sites?
So the enclosures were installed at 10 of our 14 sites, and it was really willingness from our homeowners that we had already had in place that wanted them. We also held a community gathering in the Georgetown area in 2023 to determine if there was, any interest in these, and we did get some signups at that community gathering as well. But it was really interest at the time, and then we were able to permit 10 of them based on our resources.
Awesome. And then a question in the chat, how can the Bartram Scenic Highway Group or other groups help in y'all's efforts?
Oh, that's a great question. One, I know the Bartram Scenic Group, they've been so great about alerting us of construction stresses. We had the slide showing that when you destroy wetlands or have clear cutting or any type of construction, a lot of times there's sedimentation runoff into our waterways. So that increases turbidity in the water column, which it blocks more of the light getting down. So that's a very easy way to help us if you see any damage to wetlands, anything that's going to increase any sort of runoff into the St. John's, that's a real problem. And then advocating for those, the smart growth practices, anything that we can make our communities more resilient with growth. We need to make sure that low impact is making our waterways healthier as well. So that's one very easy way. And I would ask for everyone, if you ever see anything that doesn't look right, because one of the challenges, for example, on construction sites, they're supposed to have sedimentation control and barriers from dirt runoff into our creeks and tributaries in the river, but there's not a whole lot of enforcement all the time that's timely. And so it really is helpful for citizens to use that report tool. And actually see if I can go back. The report tool to let us know what's happening out and about so we can work with the agencies or do our own investigation.
Thank you, Lisa. And then kind of jumping off that, are there opportunities for other groups to work with us and install more enclosures? Is there a need for more volunteers?
So at this time, we have not started a process to permit more. What we really want to do is see how these enclosures do for recovery. And then at the end of our 2 years, so at the end of 2027, we can circle back and see if we want to do another round.
I would add to that, though, if you are seeing grasses out on any part of the river or tributary, if you could report it to us. We do, want to know more, whenever we're out and about, we're surveying the grass. Sometimes you can see it from a boat dock or from from the bank. Sometimes you need to get in the water. But if you have SAV at your favorite fishing spot or behind your home or the park that you walk by, if you could just shoot a photo and send it to us, you can use this easy link. And that way we can map out where we're seeing grasses. One thing I forgot to mention is this, right now we're in a significant drought. And if you're not conserving water right now, now's the time to conserve water, because we are seeing a significant drought, and that's hurting the St. Johns River and its grasses in a couple ways. One, the spring flow is down, so we don't have as much fresh water from spring flow. We're not getting rainfall in the river, so we're seeing a pretty significant salinity spike further upriver. And so whenever SAV gets exposed to more salinity, that causes stress on the river. And so it's really important that we pay attention. In some areas, the drought's actually, oddly enough, helping because the lower water is helping more light get down to the area. So we anticipate next week when we go out seeing some recovery in some areas, probably around the Palatka area. But that's one thing just to note too, that different sections of the St. John's are experiencing different types of stress at a greater rate or a different ratio than other areas. But that was a long-winded way to say, if you are seeing grasses out there, if you see things bad, report them at this link, and this gives us a map. It gives us all the information for us to really track what's happening throughout the river.
And Lisa, somebody asked in the chat with this reporting tool, are you just wanting that in the main St. Johns River or all of the tributaries as well?
Yeah, I mean, the St. Johns River is only as healthy as its tributaries. And so, we ask for all the tributary information as well. Soraya, as well as other members of our team, can monitor this, and it helps us paint a picture too. There is agency data that we can bring into this conversation, but bringing in observations from people that are out there, especially those of you that are lucky enough to spend a lot of time on the river, the more information we can have, whether it's the tributaries, the springs, the St. Johns River, the main channel, it's all connected. And so we welcome and ask for any observations out there you can provide.
Thank you, Lisa. And sort of a two-pronged question from two different people. The first one, are there any recommended resources or field guides you have to help people identify native SAV when they're out in the river? And then just any resources to learn more. And then in addition, where can people go to get good native grasses if they want to plant them in the river? Are we recommending people plant grasses in the river?
So for the first one, the guide, in our 2025 and our 2026 report, we have a whole chart on the species, the common name, and the scientific name, as well as a picture to guide them, as well as a description of what that SAV should look like. And that is also located in the lower St. Johns River reports. In the second question, for planting, we do not plant at any of our sites. We allow for the SAV to grow back naturally due to the seed bank, the viable seed bank. As far as planting, there are private companies that you can do that through and private labs. But at this time, we as an organization are not doing that.
And I would just add, you do have to get a permit to do that type of work. So that would be something through the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. But we've been advocating and seeing that the native seed bank is there. And so we're hopeful to see more. But there are several projects at the St. Johns Water Management District, North Florida Land Trust, and others where they do have some permitted sites that they're experimenting and planting to see how that works out. Just this past year, there was some really interesting bounce back of really healthy eelgrass growing in Lake Monroe, which is in the Sanford area of the St. Johns. And the Water Management District actually transferred some of those plants into Lake George to see if they could boost some of the growth in the Lake George area.
Thanks, y'all. Sort of a question comment in the chat. Just wanted to see if y'all had anything to say about the recently passed 2026 Indian River Lagoon and Upper St. Johns River Basin Plan passed by the Water Management District.
Yeah, I'm happy to report on that, and I do want to applaud the St. Johns Water Management District. They're looking at the St. Johns River in different basins and coming up with a strategic plan. Yesterday at the Water Management District meeting, the board approved the strategic plan for a combined Upper Basin, Upper St. Johns River, and the Indian River Lagoon strategic report. Luckily, we've been able to meet with the agency and different stakeholders on it. And while it's a good step in the right direction, one thing that I think is missing is we don't have the data. We don't have the plans to monitor the submerged aquatic vegetation in the upper basin like we believe it needs to. We're hoping that this plan, which is updated every year, that we can work with the district to include that into the next version of it in 2027. In the Indian River Lagoon, they're doing very detailed mapping of the seagrass as well as doing water quality improvements. And they're fortunately seeing a bounce back. They're seeing seagrass in the Indian River Lagoon come back. So I think the one thing that was challenging is to see the juxtaposition of all the resources going into the lagoon that we're not quite seeing into the upper basin yet. But we're hopeful that we can see more of the eelgrass SAV monitoring in the upper basin. And now that we have a full-time headwaters specialist that is working in the headwaters and building partnerships and coalition, we anticipate doing not as the same as our SAV expedition here, but doing some red flag sampling and going out and seeing what we can find. While we haven't seen a lot of data and reports coming from any one agency about submerged aquatic vegetation in the upper basin, as I mentioned, we are getting phone calls from commercial fishermen who spend a lot of time out there. And one of them actually reports that he saw a loss of SAV beginning in 2015 and seeing similar disappearance like we're seeing throughout. And we know there's other reports in the middle. So the one thing I'd say, I think it's a good first step. I'm happy to see that the Water Management District's putting resources and understanding how the different basins, what their needs are, how they work together. But we do have more work to do in regards to SAV monitoring.
Thank you so much for that information, Lisa. I believe I have one more question left, so this is kind of everybody's last call. If you have questions, drop them in the chat. But will St. Johns Riverkeeper be creating any sort of messaging to let landowners on the river know the status of the project?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things, if you go to that QR code, we do have our 2025 report. It's really dense. I think it's 100 pages long, but there are some summaries of what we're finding. You'll see next week as we're out in the field, we always do a blog post of sort of our high-level observations that we find. So you'll see that throughout the year. We'll be participating in several scientific symposiums later this summer about SAV in the St. Johns. Soraya does a great story map, and I would think that I would really highly recommend going to the story map. We have a story map, I think, for each of the last 3 years already posted at that QR code. And not only do you go down the story map, you can see each location, you can hear a little bit about the homeowners, about the specifics to that site. And then we'll be doing SAV roundtables. So it may be at a coffee shop near you. It could be at a brewery near you. If you have a spot near your part of the river you'd like for us to come, we are always open to invitations to come talk about our river's grasses. So just give us a line or give us a call and we'll make that happen.
Thanks, Lisa. I think that is all of our questions. So Lisa and Soraya, do y'all have any closing words you'd like to offer?
Just thank you for joining and listening. And I'm excited to get back in the field and release those findings as soon as we're done.
Yeah, and same here. Just thank you all for joining us today. And really do use the report tool. Let us know what you're seeing out there. The more we can hear from you all, the better we can all work together to make a difference.
Thank you again, Lisa and Soraya, for a really great presentation, and thank you all for joining us. There will be a recording of this call posted on our website, most likely tomorrow, and I'll be sending a follow-up email to all of you as well with a link to that, as well as some other upcoming events we have coming up that we'd love to see you at. So thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye.